Hey friend, Graham here from therecordingrevolution.com. Today I want to show you how to get loud mixes. This is going to be somewhat of a foundational tutorial, so if you're not so new, you probably know this, but I continue to get emails saying, hey, I'm mixing, I'm peaking around -1, -2, -3. I can't really turn my mix up any louder or it will clip, but when I render my mix out, it doesn't sound as loud as the things on my iTunes playlist or that I hear on the radio. It just doesn't compete. And how do I get more volume without sending it to mastering? And so I continue to get that question. So I'm going to address it because this is so helpful. So if you are newer and you're struggling with how do I get my mixes to be loud enough to hang with the stuff that I hear on in my music library, here's how you do it. The short answer is use a limiter. And the long answer is I'll show you how to use that. A limiter is a lot like a compressor, but it does very, very heavy compression very, very quickly, and it also does automatic makeup gain. And it's a very, very helpful tool. So what I'm going to show you is how I do it in, let's say, Ozone from Isotope, and then I'll show you a couple other limiters that you can use as well. You can use any limiter, but the concepts are the same. I like Ozone because it gives you a visual readout, so it'll help visually show what I'm explaining. Before we jump into that, though, look at this mix. And what I want you to look at here is the mix bus. You'll see sort of what the volume is looking like.
One love, but now I'm lost without you. I give it all up tonight to hold you. Give up the red running through my blood.
So it's peaking at around -5. And so what we could do is turn up the fader to get a little bit more volume, but we maybe only have 5 dB of gain we could really push up, and then we'll start to clip.
One love, but now I'm lost without you. I give it all up tonight to hold you.
You can see my output fader is clipping now. So I just really can't play that game. I can get more volume, but then the occasional snare hit or kick drum hit or whatever will clip the mix bus. So that's a good scenario of I've got a mix that's got plenty of volume in the mix phase, but I know if I render this out, it's going to be too quiet. So how do we get this mix louder without it clipping and while keeping it contained and keeping our dynamics and all that stuff? Here's where a limiter comes in. It's the last plugin you want to insert on your mix bus or your master fader. So if you have any effects like EQ, I have EQ and compression, even tape saturation on my master fader all up here, but you'll want to insert this at the very end. In Ozone, they have something called the Maximizer. It's just a fancy word for a limiter. And what I want to show you are 2 settings and then how to read this thing. The first setting is going to be the margin setting. This might be called the ceiling. Okay, I'll show it to you in another limiter in a minute. This is telling the limiter what is the loudest part. What is the loudest point you want this mix to get? And you think you want that to be at the very top, which is unity gain or 0. But as smarter people than I have discovered, namely guys like Ian Shepard, professional mastering engineer, a good friend of mine, have pointed out if you leave this at 0, there's a chance that even if it doesn't clip in your DAW, when it gets converted to an analog signal and played back over speakers, that digital stepping to analog smoothing process can technically add a little bit of gain, and you're so close to clipping that it might actually clip and overload a bit on the way out. So the safe way to play this is to pull this down to at least -0.5, and some say all the way down to -1. You won't really be losing any apparent volume by doing this. I know it sounds counterintuitive, like why would I want to set the ceiling lower than I have to? Why I want to set it at the highest maximum point? Trust me, you won't lose any perceived volume, which is what we're going for, perceived volume. So I'll usually pull this to -0.5. That's sort of the ceiling again, or the margin. Now I know that nothing in my mix will ever go above -0.5. So that's the first one you set. The second one is going to be the threshold. You're going to press play while you do this and pull the threshold down. Just like a compressor, the threshold is the point at which you want the limiting or the compression to kick in. If it's set to 0, there's no limiting or compression happening. As you pull the threshold down, it's going to start to eventually touch some of your loudest peaks. As you saw where my mix was hitting -5 at the loudest points. As I bring this down closer to -5, then the limiting is going to kick in. But what's amazing is you're going to hear the moment you pull the threshold down on a limiter, the mix already starts to get louder. And that is because the makeup gain is automatic and it's tied to the threshold. So as you pull the threshold down, your limiters are automatically going to turn up the volume. And that's what you want, is the increased volume. But the threshold is going to protect you because it's going to start to turn down the peaks that are the most loud so that you won't clip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the threshold down. And how far do you pull it down? What I'm looking for is the gain reduction, which is going to be right here. There's going to be a readout on Ozone right here. I'm looking for that gain reduction to be no more than -3, maybe -4 on the absolute loudest hit. And it's only going to be on the loud things like kick, snare, maybe bass. I don't want it to be a constant gain reduction, just when those loud hits are happening. And that's what I'm looking for. So let's start that. And just adjust your speakers so you know the mix is going to get louder.
One love, oh, but now I'm lost without you. I give it all up tonight to hold you. Give up the red running through my blood, every word running past my tongue. Give up the air running through my lungs, make up for all the things I've done. Just give me a sign to be on the red eye, first flight headed right back to you, 'cause you're my ticket home.
There we go. We got the mix louder. It's not clipping. And what you saw was on the loud kick drum bass hits, I think the most gain reduction I saw was -4.1. And what I want you to look up here now on the visual readout of Ozone, which is why I wanted to demonstrate with Ozone today, is because it sort of shows you visually what's happening. There's no compression on the whole mix. Okay, the whole mix is not getting squashed except for when the loud peaks happen. So it's really turning down the snare drum, it's turning down the kick drum, and the bass when those are super loud. And it's allowing you to bring up the guitars, the vocals, everything else nice and even, and keeping their dynamic. So watch the visual readout here.
One love, oh, but now I'm lost without you. I give it all up tonight.
See, no limiting there, limiting there. And it's when it's going down this far, it's -4. So you could see how most of the mix, there's no compression or dynamic range reduction happening. It's just on the loudest peaks. That is how you get loudness in a mix. You have to turn something down so that you can turn something else up, just like a compressor. It's the only way it works. So this is the biggest tool for you, is to set the margin on a limiter or set the ceiling a little bit below 0, and then pull the threshold down and watch your gain reduction to see that you're not totally squashing your mix. Like I said, -3 to -4 on the loudest peaks is my rule of thumb. The beautiful thing is, a lot of limiters, you're going to have additional options to adjust the character of the limiter. In this case, there's different modes. There's 5 modes: soft, hard, then IRC 1, 2, and 3, which are sort of algorithms for the way the limiting works. So you could even literally set the threshold, get it sounding loud, and then flip through these 5 and see which one sounds the most musical to you. If it's a hard rock song, you might want a harder limiter to really give you aggressive sounds. But if it's more of a smooth jazz piece, you want loudness without it being squashed, so the soft setting might be a little more musical. There's also a character knob here on Ozone that, again, you can adjust that slider to adjust how the limiting happens. That's all the fine tuning, which is a beautiful thing. Now we know if I turn the maximizer or the limiter off, this is where we lose our volume. And what I want you to look at is my submix, which is going to be the mix before any of my mix bus processing, and then the mix bus meter. Look at those two, and you'll see the difference in gain, and you'll hear it.
One love, oh, but now I'm lost without you. I give it all up tonight to hold you. Give up the red running through my blood, every word running past my tongue. Give up.
There we go. That's the gain difference. Now let me show you in one more limiter. I'll turn this one off so that you can see this can happen in other plugins. So for example, the stock Pro Tools limiter is called Maxim. And Maxim, you're going to see the two main things. You're going to see ceiling, which is, like I said, it's like the margin slider on Ozone. Ceiling is more typical. You could pull that down to minus 0.4, minus 0.5. And then it has a threshold knob. Okay? So let's press play and let's pull this thing down.
One love, oh, but now I'm lost without you. I give it all up tonight to hold you. Give up the red running through my blood, every word running past my tongue. Give up the air running through my lungs to make up for all the things I've done. Just give me a sign of you're the red eye, first fly headed right.
You can see the attenuation, which is their gain reduction meter. It was -3 on the loudest peaks until one peak was -6.8. So I might back that up a little bit. And you can see a cool readout of where most of the sound in this mix is in this big like belly right here, right? It's most of the sound is underneath where the limiting or compression is happening. This orange part is where the actual gain reduction is happening. So most of the mix is untouched. It stays musical, stays exactly the way you mixed it. But we have to turn these ones down at strategic points to then allow the overall volume output to increase. So again, this is a very simple limiter. This is a classic limiter where you set the ceiling, pull down the threshold, watch the attenuation or gain reduction, make sure it's that -3 to -4 rule on the loudest peaks, and you should be good. Something very interesting about this one in particular is that it has a wet and dry knob. So actually, you could go even more experimental and do very, very heavy limiting and then dial back. So it's like parallel processing on the limiting. You actually can blend the unlimited mix with the heavily limited mix and experiment with getting a loud but musical sound there. So that's a free stock limiter that comes with Pro Tools. Very, very, very cool. And I'll show you one more. Turn that off. This is from Massey. It does not matter the brand. I just want to show you different ways they look so that you can be familiar with the same things. Okay, this one, whereas Ozone called it margin and Maxim called it ceiling, this one calls it output, which is a good description of it. Set the loudest point for the output. By default, it's set to 0. I could dial this down to -0.5, just like the other ones. And then I have a threshold knob, the two main knobs. So I can press play and dial this back. I'm going to look for the gain reduction here in the middle. And you'll see the input and the output, which means this meter is going to be what the real mix is going into the limiter, and this is going to be the final output.
One love, oh, but now I'm lost without you. I give it all up tonight to hold you. Give up the red running through my blood, every word running past my tongue. Give up the air running.
There you go, -3.9 dB is the loudest attenuated gain reduction there, so that's probably a good spot. And just like on Ozone, this has two modes as well, a mode and a release setting, so you can change, it's set to loud by default. Then there's mellow, smooth, and vibrant, which are different ways the limiter attacks the audio. So you would experiment with these and see what sounds best on that song. Very different things can change the way a limiter responds, the way how much bass you have, if there's any distortion, how wide or mono the mix is. All these random things can affect the limiter. So you might want to play with these settings once you get a good gain reduction level to see what sounds the best to you. And then there is a release setting, because by default, limiters have a really quick release, meaning it compresses the peak and then it wants to let go of the peak quickly so the next peak that's coming through has a chance to come through at the normal volume. But you can even adjust the release settings here to find what sounds most musical for you. And once you got that setting, you have a super loud mix that should compete with something that's been mastered. It gets very, very close in volume. This is not the only way to get more volume. This is not the only way to get a loud mix. This is the easiest, fastest, simplest way. And this is what I'm doing all the time when I'm mixing, especially for a client and they want to hear the mix and they want to hear it as loud as everything else. When I send it to them, I'll put a limiter on it. I use limiting in mastering. It's a very, very helpful tool. Every DAW ships with one, as far as I know, should ship with one. It's basically a compressor with a very, very high ratio, very, very fast attack and release, and it's going to have an output or ceiling where you set and then pull down the threshold until you see that -3 to -4. and then print your mix, then render out your mix through that, and that's how you're going to get the gain. So louder mixes, use a limiter. Hope that helps. This is very, very helpful to the new beginner mixer. I remember having the same problem of how do I get my mixes to sound loud? And this is why I can tell you, and I tell my students, don't worry about how loud your mix is while you're mixing. In fact, get conservative levels. Turn things down with a trim plugin. Turn things down on the clip level so that you have very conservative levels. You're not even close to clipping your mix bus. You'll get a better sound. Your converters will thank you. And if you can't hear it, turn up your speakers. Don't worry about loudness until you're done with a mix, because it doesn't matter how loud the mix is, because you can always make it louder later with a limiter. This is why. This is why you don't have to fear your mix being too quiet, because you can use a limiter later. Sound off. Let me know what you think about this. Have you used a limiter? Do you use limiters in your mixes? Which limiter do you use? Have you found any rules of thumb that help you get a loud but still musical and dynamic mix? Leave me a comment below the video. Let me know. If you have any more questions about limiting, if something wasn't clear, send me a question via email or a comment below the video on the blog, and I'll try to be able to address that in another video soon. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing to the videos, liking the videos, sharing the videos. They all help. I appreciate it. Of course, if you want more mix training, you got to join the Insiders list. I'll send you the Smart Start to Mixing video series, which reveals really the biggest mistake most mixers make when they're setting up their mixes at home. And I walk you through a great process to get more musical, better sounding mixes with the plugins you already have. It's all there for free, but you got to go to the Recording Revolution and join the list to get it. I'll send that to you and a bunch of other goodies. So if you like this kind of training and you want to get better mixes with the same plugins and the same gear you have, you probably want to join that. That's all I have for you this week. Have a fantastic weekend. Make some great music and have fun. We'll talk to you on another video soon. Take care.